5:05 and welcome into a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Well, 70 of North Carolina's 100 counties have completed recounts in this very closely contested race for the North Carolina Supreme Court. Appointed incumbent Democrat Allison Riggs' lead has dropped by 69 votes over Republican challenger Jefferson Griffin. However, with that, Riggs still leads Griffin by well over 600 votes, as there is there is 30 counties exactly that remain with their recount totals. All recounts must be completed by Wednesday. There are still a couple of large counties withstanding, but that margin, that lead for Riggs, still pretty substantial as of this morning. Griffin has gained a net of 22 votes with the recount efforts. Riggs has lost 47 votes as the statewide recount continues. Griffin said in regards to this recount in a news release issued back on November the 20th, quote, "As North Carolinians, we cherish our democratic process. Protecting election integrity is not just an option, it's our duty. These protests are about one fundamental principle, ensuring every legal vote is counted." Griffin's protest highlights specific irregularities and discrepancies in the handling of counting ballots, raising concerns about adherence to established election law, according to a news release from him. What's going on right now is a straight machine recount, meaning that every ballot that was cast in that contest, over 5.5 million in the North Carolina Supreme Court race that we are talking about between Riggs and Griffin, is just being run through a tabulator, run through a counting machine once again. There is some separate challenges on about 60,000 ballots that Jefferson Griffin is attempting to get thrown out. We are still waiting for additional details on that, but this full machine recount will be completed by Wednesday, right ahead of the Thanksgiving holiday. We'll continue to track those details throughout the rest of this short holiday week and provide any additional details as we get them right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:07, News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. U.S. Senator Ted Budd has a new position in Washington, D.C., and it could have some impacts on future elections. To go through those details this morning, Brianna Kramer from the Carolina Journal joins us this morning on the News Hour. Brianna, a big decision and a huge appointment for U.S. Senator Ted Budd, one of our two Republican senators in the state. What position is he stepping into?
Yes, good morning, Nick. They are already moving on from the 2024 election and preparing for midterms just around the corner. So U.S. Senator Ted Budd of North Carolina has been named one of the new vice chairs of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. And that is the campaign arm for the Republican senators. And they work to elect Republicans in the U.S. Senate on Capitol Hill. So North Carolina U.S. Senator Thom Tillis, the other senator here in North Carolina, he's up for re-election in 2026. And so this is a big deal here in North Carolina. There's 19 other Republican senators up for re-election in 2026 as well. And so Ted Budd is going to be one of a team of 5 senators who will serve in expanding, or at least they hope to grow, expand, and work to have a really good 2026 midterm election season.
Well, and midterm elections are always tough for the incumbent party. It doesn't matter if it's the Republicans or the Democrats in power. And specifically in this midterm, as you just noted, Republicans are going to have to defend 19 seats. That's a lot that they're going to have to deal with in those midterm elections. Brianna, I assume most people are familiar with the RNC, the Republican National Committee, but there's actually these election arms on both the Senate and the House side. Not only are they super influential, they raise a boatload of money. Some, in the case of the Republican committee that we're talking about, $260 million just in the last election cycle?
Yes. So for the Senate Republicans, their campaign arm raised $260 million. And then we have the National Republican Congressional Committee, and that is the House GOP campaign arm. they raised $228 million. So huge arms of the parties that are helping to reelect these members to Congress, or in some cases, elect new Republicans into office. And then we also look at the Democrat side, and they also have these arms that help to raise funds and transfer money out of these political committees and help their candidates as well. So the House Democrat arm raised $306 million. So that was actually the most in this past cycle. And then the Democrat senatorial political committee raised $241 million. So obviously they're all really huge, really powerful, and they do a lot in the lead up to every election, every 2 or 4 years. They're planning far ahead and watching for what seats are going to be open and who they need to fundraise for, who has maybe an easy race, who is retiring possibly, and also the primaries, because that lies ahead as well.
Yeah, no question about that. And for Senate Republicans, I think most folks predicted it would be tough for them to get control of the Senate in this election cycle as we come off the high of the early November election. Not only did they hold a majority, Brianna, they're currently sitting at 53 seats, which may not sound like a lot compared to the 47 that the Democrats have. But in the U.S. Senate, that is a huge margin for Republicans to have. And most folks did not really think that was possible going into the election. They well exceeded any sort of expectations there.
Yes, that's right. With 53 Republicans in the Senate, they can really get stuff done if they want to. Now, there's definitely differences between the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans. And it looks like there's a little bit more controversy on the Senate side. And, they have John Thune is going to represent the entire Senate as the majority leader. And then he's made some appointments, Susan Collins and some other longtime Republicans who, they kind of tend to go for Democrat-leaning ideas sometimes and side with Democrats. And so that's why they're a little bit more controversial to some more hard conservative-leaning supporters. And so, there's a little bit more work that needs to be done on the Senate side in terms of, the bills to come in the months that lie ahead with the Trump administration taking the White House in January. But for the next 2 years, the Republicans will have control on Capitol Hill and the White House. So we'll see how much they can get done. But of course, they'll also be looking ahead for 2026 to, of course, try to keep that majority that they now have.
Well, obviously here in the state of North Carolina, Brown, it's pretty amazing when you look at the positions of power that Republicans from North Carolina are in. Of course, our story this morning about Ted Budd. We've got Chuck Edwards on the House side of this. Michael Whatley, the former head of the North Carolina GOP, is now the head of the RNC. His Trump's daughter-in-law from the Wilmington area is the co-chair of the RNC. It seems as if North Carolina, for all intents and purposes, is running many of these Republican outfits. I guess that goes to show the importance of this state, not only for the presidential election, but for these House and Senate seats that we see every 2, 4, or 6 years.
Yeah, that's right. We continue to see that North Carolina is a very important state. And we just saw that in this past election, how many times all of the candidates at the national level wanted to visit North Carolina continuously for weeks and months on end. North Carolina is a big player on the national stage. And we have, Representative Richard Hudson. He's the leader of the House campaign arm. And so we do have a lot of key players up in D.C. from North Carolina. And of course, we're a swing state. And so we really, have a lot of impact when it comes to these elections. And so we're going to have a lot going into 2026, I think. And we have some strong voices that will be at the front of the table leading the state and the elections to come.
You can read more on Brianna's story by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. It's 5:14, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get a look at traffic on this Tuesday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Thank you, Nick. Looking great. Hot.
It's 5:18. A good Tuesday morning to you. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Last Friday, Senators Thom Tillis, Ted Budd, as well as Representative Virginia Foxx and Chuck Edwards, as well as some other lawmakers representing North Carolina, sent a letter to President Joe Biden urging him to waive regulations and provide temporary housing to victims of Hurricane Helene in western North Carolina. It's not a lengthy letter. It was also CC'd to Diane Criswell, the administrator of FEMA, but I want to read through it for you this morning. It says, in the wake of the devastation Hurricane Helene inflicted on western North Carolina, many of our constituents remain unable to return to their homes. With that, temperatures are beginning to drop, and we are hearing reports that residents are struggling to receive adequate temporary shelters that is safe for the winter and close to their property. We request that you immediately direct the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, to deploy FEMA temporary housing resources, including travel trailers and manufactured homes in the special flood hazard area in western North Carolina. This would give homeowners the ability to remain on their own property while repairs and reconstruction continues. FEMA regulations prevent the deployment of temporary housing resources in areas that are prone to flooding, which inherently makes sense. While this policy is designed to protect the safety of homeowners waiting to be able to return to their homes from the risk of dangerous further flooding, this policy can also prevent residents from being able to stay on their own property, which would make it more difficult for those impacted residents to stay close to families and loved ones, attend school, continue working, and help their communities rebuild. In 2023, FEMA concluded that, quote, one feasible option to place temporary housing units, end quote, was to allow property in Florida's special flood hazard areas to participate in FEMA's direct housing programs. Many of those homeowners in western North Carolina who need temporary housing live in those FEMA flood areas. We have heard reports that homeowners who understandably want to remain on their property are being denied resources and have been forced to live out of tents on their own property. As temperatures begin to drop, this will no longer be an option. We appreciate your swift consideration of this request and stand ready to help with you and your administration to get this authorized approval. That is from Ted Budd, Thom Tillis, both of our Republican senators, as well as Congress members Virginia Foxx and Chuck Edwards, also sent to the FEMA administrator. So talking about a little bit of red tape and bureaucracy in this case. Obviously, the logical thing, it makes sense you wouldn't put a trailer or some sort of temporary housing in a flood zone. However, with the extraordinary circumstances out in western North Carolina, these Republican lawmakers are calling for FEMA to waive some of these regulations, which does make sense with the current situation that we sit in this morning. That letter was sent on Friday. We'll see if we get any movement on that over the next couple of days or into parts of early next week. We'll continue to track those details right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:22, News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. House Bill 10 was overridden by the General Assembly back a couple of weeks ago, and one of the big pieces of HB 10 was requiring all 100 sheriffs in the state of North Carolina to comply with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and detainer requests that come down from that organization. With some additional details on how that's rolling out thus far, Brianna Kramer joins us this morning from CarolinaJournal.com. Brianna, this piece of legislation was in limbo for a lot of time until this veto override. It is now state law, regardless of what Governor Roy Cooper and Democrats wanted. What are some of those updates that you're following this morning?
Yes, that's right. So it took a very long time for this part of the bill in HB 10, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to finally become law here in North Carolina, but it has passed now that the General Assembly did vote to override the governor's veto. And so last Friday, the North Carolina Sheriff's Association notified all sheriffs across the state about the passage of this bill and that the new law is taking effect on December 1st. And that requires all law enforcement officers to cooperate with federal immigration detainers for undocumented immigrants.
Yeah, and, for the most part, Brianna, this was followed by like 90 out of 100 county sheriffs. So this is not necessarily going to have broad effects across the state, but in one area in particular, one of our largest metros, Mecklenburg County, where the sheriff there, Gary McFadden, has been on record and seemingly has been proud that he is not working with ICE, not working with the federal government with these detention detainers. You actually talked with him earlier this year about that. What did you hear from him at the time? And presumably now, if he refuses to do that, he'll be in violation of North Carolina law.
Yes, that's right. So there's other counties besides Mecklenburg, Wake, Buncombe, Durham, Orange. These counties consider themselves to be sanctuary jurisdictions. Now, that may differ on how much they cooperate with ICE or not. Sounds like some of them definitely do cooperate with ICE. But in Mecklenburg, when I was able to speak with Gary McFadden, he said that he doesn't believe he has the authority to hold a person in jail even though they've issued this detainer request. He says there's a conflict between state law and federal law and, the federal immigration and customs enforcement issuing this detainer, because he's saying they can't just continue to unlawfully hold somebody in jail, even though you're supposed to let them be free if a local magistrate has already allowed them to be out of jail. So I guess there was some kind of conflict that he was talking about, and he's just openly against honoring these ICE detainers and really just argues that the policy is unlawful in itself.
Well, I guess maybe under previous North Carolina law it was, but under HB 10, with that now being enacted, I guess maybe that conflict that the sheriff in Mecklenburg County had, I guess, potentially goes away.
Yes, I think so. So he had previously referred to General Statute 162.62, and that says that nothing should prevent a person from being released if they meet all the conditions of their bond. So that was his argument, is that they are supposed to be released now. But I think what this state law, this new HB 10 state law does is get rid of that conflict that may have been the case and that some sheriffs used as a way to not cooperate with ICE. So now the state law overrides that or trumps that. And so they don't really have that, excuse anymore. And they're in the clear, because he was concerned more about the legality of it. And if he could then be in trouble for, this conflict and letting them free or keeping them in jail. And so he was kind of concerned about the legal part of it. But I think HB 10 and the new ICE law clears things up, so all sheriffs will be on the same page and not have any concerns anymore.
Brianna, from what I understand about these ICE detainers, these are not something that happen very often. It typically is when somebody is charged with a more serious crime, driving without a seatbelt or not using your turn signal, something like that. That's not, from everything I've read, ICE is not putting out detainers for individuals that are illegally in the country that get charged with those things. For the most part, these are relatively serious offenses when the federal government and immigrations and customs enforcement really step in on this.
Yes, it's not anything like a seatbelt violation or car violation. That's what a lot of people against this bill like to say, is that this is targeting all undocumented immigrants. You could at any point be deported now or, be in custody with ICE. But that's not the case. This is for serious criminals, dangerous criminals that are in jail. Child molesters, murderers, like serious crimes that were already committed, and that person is sitting in jail, and then ICE can come and issue a detainer to keep them in jail on hold until they have time to get there, and take them into custody to eventually deport them out of the country. But a lot of times, they'll try to use that as a talking point, that this is for anybody that's not a citizen or that's here illegally. And that's just not the case.
This is not only an interesting story now, it's going to continue to be an interesting one over the next couple of weeks and months. Brianna Kramer joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 528, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time for another look at the roadways this morning. Boomer Von Cannon's got the latest in traffic.
Hey, thank you, Nick. In South Charlotte.
All right, welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT 535. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Good Tuesday morning to you. In tracking some statewide news this morning, well, it's actually federal news, but it's got a major statewide connection ahead of the 2026 midterm elections, in which, well, Senator Thom Tillis will be up for re-election. North Carolina Senator Ted Budd has been named the vice chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. It's known as NRSC. You may have heard that acronym before, which is the campaign organization that is focusing on electing Republicans to the U.S. Senate. U.S. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina is the NRSC chairman, and it was announced at a leadership meeting last week, and there are 5 vice chairs, one of them being Budd, and the goal with all of that, to help grow the Republican Senate majority. The other vice chairs are Senators Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee, Katie Britt of Alabama, Pete Ricketts of Nebraska, and Senator-elect Jim Banks of Indiana. Budd emphasized the Republicans' unity in advocating former President and now President-elect Donald Trump's agenda and preparing for a successful 2026 campaign cycle in the midterms. Scott echoed the calls for coordinated efforts to defend and expand the Republican Senate majority with a focus on raising resources, expanding the electoral map, and building a strong organization. Republicans are poised to take control of both chambers of Congress in January of next year, with 20 Republican senators, including North Carolina Senator Thom Tillis, up for re-election in 2026. The math is very tough for Republicans in the midterm election. Of course, it's always tough for the incumbent party to win in midterms. It's not impossible. It's not something that's never happened before, but it is very tough to defend your majority in that midterm election. So having Ted Budd and these other 4 individuals in as vice chairs, all being led by Tim Scott of South Carolina, is a major win for Republicans, not only here across the state, but nationwide, as they'll look to defend that majority. Even though we're just coming off of the hangover of the recent election, as you can imagine, that stuff will ramp up pretty quickly, especially here in the state of North Carolina. We'll continue to follow details right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. The North Carolina Sheriff's Association has informed all 100 county sheriffs about the veto override on House Bill 10, which is a new law that does take effect coming up here shortly, December 1st of this year. In part, it mandates cooperation with federal immigration detainers for undocumented immigrants. This legislation requires individuals subject to federal immigration detainers to be brought promptly before a judicial official, who will determine if they match the detainer and issue a court order for continued custody. The bill aimed at addressing non-compliance with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and their requests in certain urban areas. And that was passed after the General Assembly overrode Democrat Governor Roy Cooper's veto last week. Revisions to the bill include reducing record-keeping requirements and judicial oversight, and secured the endorsement of the Sheriff's Association. The Sheriff's Association emphasized the law's straightforward implementation, negating the need for additional training. However, enforcement remains the responsibility of all 100 county sheriffs across the state. To prepare law enforcement for broader legislative changes, the Sheriff's Association has conducted legislative update training sessions across the state, ensuring that officers, and in this case sheriffs, are equipped to adapt to new laws. This training is now part of the mandatory in-service education for all North Carolina law enforcement officers. Again, the impacts will not be super broad, as most sheriffs were already following this. However, the Mecklenburg County Sheriff in Gary McFadden was one that was not. We'll see how this shakes out over the coming weeks and months. Again, that law goes into effect coming up this Sunday, actually, December the 1st. We'll keep an eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:40. And as you are getting ready for your Thanksgiving holiday, maybe you are last minute to the grocery store. Nothing wrong with that, as long as you've got it all by Thursday morning. And one thing to be thankful for this year, thanks but no thanks, is lower price tags for your Thanksgiving dinner. For a second year in a row, the cost of buying a Thanksgiving dinner has decreased from the year before. That's according to the American Farm Bureau Federation's annual report, which was released last week. Inflation rose at 2.6% annually in the month of October compared to last year, according to CPI data released 2 weeks ago. But most importantly in the report to Americans and those that will be cooking this Thursday, food at home prices are up just 1.1% from that same time last year compared to 2022 when those prices jumped more than 10%. The average cost for a Thanksgiving dinner to feed a family of 10 is $58.08 this year. So one of the big staples of Thanksgiving dinner, of course, is the turkey. U.S. farmers are expected to raise about 205 million turkeys this year. That's the lowest amount, actually, since 1985 because of an increase in avian influenza. That's according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's September report. Despite the lower supply, demand for turkey has fallen this year, and prices have followed. The Farm Bureau Volunteer Shopper Program, which is how they conduct this survey, found on average a 16-pound turkey is costing you about $25.67. That's a 6% decrease from last year. The American Farm Bureau Federation has given the same shopping list to volunteer shoppers from all 50 states and Puerto Rico since they started this study back in 1986 to calculate that average cost of a Thanksgiving dinner. Alongside the staple in turkey, the list includes cube stuffing, sweet potatoes, dinner rolls, frozen peas, fresh cranberries, celery, carrots, pumpkin pie mix, crust, whipped cream, and whole milk. More than half of those items dropped in price since last year, leading to an 8.7% decrease from that meal cost last year. Aside from fresh cranberries, all the items that increased in prices were processed foods. They include dinner rolls, whipped cream, and cubed stuffing. And so when we look at overall, the average cost in 2024, unless you're out in the western half of the country where somehow the price there is almost $12 to $15 more on average than it is here in portions of the southeast half of the United States, most items are down in price. The biggest that I saw looking at the list were whole milk, which is down 14.17% from last year, and a three-pound bag of sweet potatoes, which is down 26.5% from where that was just a couple of years ago. And to look at where prices have been, 2022 was the highest ever for that Thanksgiving meal adjusted for inflation. That was coming off of the summer of a record sky-high inflation. Just to put this in context, the average cost of a Thanksgiving meal for 10 people with that same shopping list in 2022 was $67.84. Yes, $67 compared to just $58 this year. So great to see. If you are procrastinating and heading out to the grocery store, things will be a little bit cheaper for Thanksgiving 2024. It's now 5:44 on the Carolina Journal News Hour, News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. Hopefully Boomer Boncannon did his Thanksgiving shopping. We'll get a look at traffic with him. Boomer, good morning.
Ready to feast now, Nick. Yes, sir.
5:49. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on Newstalk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. We are streaming live this morning, as always, on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel. You can tune in there or watch it after the fact. And our podcast is now available wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for the Carolina Journal News Hour and subscribe. You'll get a new program delivered each and every weekday morning. You can also listen on your computer at work by visiting WBT.com and hovering over the podcast tab. We're tracking some statewide news this morning, and yes, we are, of course, at this point, 3 weeks removed from the general election that took place earlier this month. However, recounts do continue in the state of North Carolina for one race at the top of the ticket. That would be the state's Supreme Court race, in which more than 5.5 million votes were cast. And as of this morning, 70 out of all 100 North Carolina counties have completed their machine recount. What they are doing is simply taking ballots and rerunning them through tabulators to recalculate their vote totals. And with that, this very tight race between incumbent Democrat Allison Riggs and Republican challenger Jefferson Griffin. Taking a look at the numbers this morning from the State Board of Elections, Riggs has lost 47 votes and Griffin has gained 22 votes in this contest. There are still some major counties that need to complete their recount efforts. Griffin, as I noted, gained a net vote of 22 among counties that have finished their work. Meanwhile, Riggs has lost 47 votes. She lost 21 votes in Lenoir County and 14 in Durham. She gained 6, however, in Watauga. However, while that recount continues, Griffin, challenger Jefferson Griffin in this, is also challenging more than 60,000 votes statewide. He says, quote, "As North Carolinians, we cherish our democratic process. Protecting election integrity is not just an option, it's our duty." He said that in a news release back on November the 20th and noted that these protests are about one fundamental principle: ensuring every legal vote counts. So as it stands right now, Riggs still leads Griffin by more than 600 votes. As those final 30 counties report their numbers, she will still likely lead by a similar amount to that. So if none of these illegal challenges that are being pursued by Griffin and Republicans like the NCGOP are successful, she will end up winning that contest by between 500 and 600 votes. However, we'll likely continue to see this taking place for the next couple of weeks. We'll continue to track details right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Taking a look at some federal news this morning, Senator Thom Tillis, Ted Budd, as well as Virginia Foxx and Chuck Edwards are now sending a letter and have sent a letter to President Joe Biden urging him to waive regulations and provide temporary housing to additional victims of Hurricane Helene in western parts of North Carolina. This all comes down to a FEMA-designated zone called the Specialty Flood Hazard Area, or the SFHA. And these are flood zones throughout the United States of America. And with that, FEMA does not roll out travel trailers and manufactured homes in those flood hazards areas because those are not site-built properties. And if there is any flooding or flash flooding, it could make those housing structures incredibly dangerous. However, with the widespread devastation out west, these 4 Republicans, 2 in the Senate, 2 in the House, are calling on President Joe Biden to waive those regulations. They write in their letter, FEMA regulations prevent the deployment of temporary housing resources in areas prone to flooding. And while this policy is designated to protect the safety of homeowners waiting to be able to return to their homes from the risk of dangerous further flooding, this policy can also prevent residents from being able to stay on their own property, which would make it more difficult for those impacted residents to stay close to family and loved ones, attend school, continue working, and help their communities rebuild from Hurricane Helene. So they are now calling on the Biden administration. The letter is also CC'd to Diane Criswell, who is the administrator of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. That letter was sent on Friday to Biden. We have not heard or gotten any follow-up in response to that. And obviously, in this case, you're trying to weigh out two things here. Obviously, you don't want to put people additionally at risk with some of these temporary housing structures. However, temperatures are now very cold out west, and there are reports of individuals that are living in tents on their own property because they are getting denied this ability to get some of these temporary structures put up. And unfortunately, it seems like the cold weather in this case is a greater risk than some of that flash flooding, at least according to these members of Congress, both the House and the Senate. We'll keep an eye on it and pass additional details as we learn about them to you right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Well, it was a great honor for North Carolina yesterday. The holiday season was in full swing at the White House on Monday as First Lady Jill Biden welcomed this year's official White House Christmas tree. This tradition is decades old, and this is taking a new meaning this year after Hurricane Helene ripped through portions of western North Carolina. The First Lady was joined by her grandson, Beau Biden, as well as Representative Virginia Foxx and 4 North Carolina-based National Guard families for Monday's event in front of the White House. And according to Jill Biden, she said in just a few days, volunteers from all over the country will pour in to transform this tree and decorate the entire White House. This year's tree is an 18.5-foot Fraser fir, and it comes from Carter's Christmas Tree Farm in Avery County, North Carolina. The more than 60-year-old family farm is run by the 3 Carter brothers, David, Jim, and Sam, and won the North Carolina Christmas Tree Association's annual competition in order to be crowned the Grand Champion Grower and secure this honor of having their tree displayed in the White House as the official Christmas tree. David Carter remarked at the event Monday, 25 years ago, listen to this, 25 years ago, our father planted that tree, and here we are after all of that time. The tree's name is Tremendous and was presented to the First Lady on a green and red wagon pulled by 2 Clydesdale horses yesterday afternoon, and soon it will be standing floor to ceiling in the middle of the White House's Blue Room, continuing a tradition that dates all the way back to the 1960s. Obviously, this year, after Hurricane Helene ripped through portions of western North Carolina, it damaged thousands of trees on the Carter's family farm in western North Carolina. And according to the three Carter brothers, they say that this tree represents much more than just a family business. We'll get additional details on that story with Teresa Opeka from the Carolina Journal coming up for you tomorrow morning. That's going to do it for a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back tomorrow morning at 5 right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.